Today is September 25th, 2020. My name is Cristián Doña-Reveco, and I am interviewing Guadalupe Rivera for the Conversaciones Oral History Project, Voces of a Pandemic project at the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies at UNO and Criss Library. This project is in partnership with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Ms. Rivera, that this interview will be placed in the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Dr. Cici and Mabel L. Criss Library, and shared with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we're not conducting this interview in person, I need to record your consent. So I'll ask you a series of 6 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are several questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. The Office of Latino and Latin American Studies and Criss Library wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Dr. Cici and Mabel L. Criss Library. UNO's Criss Library will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. First question, do you give the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies consent to archive your interview and your materials at UNO Criss Library?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant UNO's Criss Library right, title, and interest in copyright over the interview and any materials you provide?
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree to allow UNO's Criss Library to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies consent to share your interview and your materials with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin for inclusion in the Voces of a Pandemic Oral History mini project, which will include posting the interview on the internet?
Yes, I agree.
We have many questions. Thank you, Lupita. We have many questions in a pre-interview form that we have already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server at the University of Texas at Austin. Before Voces sets it to the Benson Library and Criss Library, we will have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library and Criss Library. Question, do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
Yes, I agree.
And last question, on occasion, the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies and Voces receive requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your emails with journalists?
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. Thank you very much, EP.
Yes.
So to start, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, about where you grew up, what you do, where you work, all that kind of information.
Okay. I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants. I grew up in a really small rural farming community in western Nebraska. There was very little minorities. There were very few minorities. Of the other Mexican families that were in our area, most of them were 3rd or 4th generation, where they no longer spoke Spanish, or their names were no longer pronounced the correct Spanish way. In my household, though, we spoke Spanish. We still ate tortillas. We still made tortillas. We had very authentic names growing up. And so growing up in the early 80s in rural Nebraska, I really came to recognize that my race was not that accepted. I remember in elementary school really trying to succeed, but when derogatory names were aimed my way, teachers would never, they would hush us, but nobody would ever point out the fact that it was a racist name that I was called, or statements that were made against my mother. And so it was really hard, knowing that I was going through something, but not knowing yet that it had a name, and it was racism and it was discrimination. I loved my friends. And, you know, as I grew older, I started to realize that I felt like I was never 100% accepted in the white American society. My father passed away when I was really little. And so on top of that, we were very poor growing up. So my father passed away when I was 3, and there was 7 siblings. And so my mother had a 2nd grade education from Mexico, but she did as best as she could. Like, we grew up on a farm, so we were never needing food because we had livestock. But we did have to reach out to charities and other forms of assistance when we needed other things in the household. And so I know my mom was always super embarrassed to do these things, but it was needed. It was needed. And so we did grow up in a household very poor. We were just very poor. As I got older, and all of a sudden in the early 1990s, there was a huge influx of Mexican immigrants in Western Nebraska. And that's due to the meatpacking plants that were in Grand Island, Nebraska and Lexington, Nebraska. Specifically in Lexington, there was a huge population of Mexican immigrants that came, and all of a sudden, the focus was back on our race. And in some ways, good, in some ways not so good. It was the first time that I had other people comment or compliment me on things like my name being Guadalupe, or my hair is so dark, or just, you know, attributes that I always looked down upon when I was a little girl, all of a sudden became features that people wanted to know more about when I became older. The fact that I could speak English and Spanish and intermix both languages so well and understand both languages was fascinating to some people. On the flip side of that, there was also a very Republican area, very conservative area, where people really believed that the immigrants were coming to steal jobs. And so that was constantly thrown up. There was a lot of race war, you can say, in Grand Island at the time, because we had a large population of Mexican immigrants that came, and there was already a large population of people from Vietnam. And so all of a sudden there was this clash between the Mexicans and the Vietnamese. And so we would see these things, and people would say, you know, all of them need to go, all of them need to go. And so it was a time in my life, I think, that I really appreciated the safety of, I guess you can say, the safety of my home, the safety of my acceptance in my family. And when I mean family, I mean extended family as well, like work cousins or aunts. You felt that safety. You became a different person in Mexican society versus American society. And so I grew up still in the country. I graduated from high school. I remember applying for colleges, and the school counselor at the time, I was really into theater and speech. And I did really, really well, and I exceeded in poetry interpretation. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I wanted to go into theater and journalism when I was graduating from high school. And the school counselor just discouraged me from doing it. He just said, you know, I don't think that you're going to be college material. I think you should really think about finding a job and helping your mom. And it's hard to say these things because he was a very good person. It was somebody my mom appreciated and leaned upon when we, you know, just had issues that came up in our household. He was always somebody who thought about our family and would reach out and just check how we're doing. But in his white mind, he also seen me as nothing more than the daughter of an immigrant that's probably going to go on to work at a meatpacking plant. He encouraged me to find a job in my senior year of high school, which I did. I am very creative, and so I like to sew, and I found a job as a seamstress. I was a part-time seamstress while I was in high school. And so I would leave high school during the day because my grades were so good that I had finished most of my credits towards graduation, and I was able to leave school early, but I would leave school early to go not to school, not to college, but to go to work. And so I didn't go to college right away because, like I said, I was just discouraged from going into what I really wanted to do. I was encouraged to keep working. When people found out at school that I was a part-time seamstress, it encouraged other people, I think, to say, oh, well, you know, this is something you've learned from your grandma or your mother, and that's all you're kind of going to be good at. And so the work of a laborer was just really encouraged that I continue doing something like that. So I did try attending a community college afterwards, but it was just difficult for me because I didn't apply for any assistance. And so I was working and I was trying to pay for my own studies and I just couldn't do it. And so I ended up stopping. I just devoted myself to full-time working. In Grand Island, and as I was growing up, immigration has always been always a part of my life. Always, always, always. I knew when my uncles had received their green cards. I knew when my cousins had applied for immigration. I helped one of my uncles when I was probably about 15 because he had some letters he had received from then INS, and they were asking him to fill out some forms and he didn't understand because they were all in English. And it really caught my attention. It caught my attention for a couple of reasons. I was irritated that everything was sent to him in English, even though my uncle only spoke Spanish. He had a conditional card at the time and he was applying for permanent residency, and they were asking for so many things, and my uncle was ready to give up. He was like, I don't know how to get these things. I don't know. I'm not going to do it. And so I encouraged him. Like, I filled out the paperwork on my own. I took him, you know, we went to different places to get the evidence that he needed. We got the letters of support that he needed, and I helped him put this package together. And at the time, immigration was front desk. So you would go and take the things in person. And so immigration was a 2.5 hour drive from our home. And so that day, I remember I begged my mom if I could miss school. My mom was okay with it because my uncle was going to pay me. And he said, I'll pay you for your day. You can be with us. And I'll, you know, I was trying to buy a dress at the time. So the money was going to go to something specific. And we came to Omaha, and I was just amazed. I was absolutely amazed because the immigration building was this itty bitty tiny closet looking office. And there was rows of people outside of the immigration building waiting to come in. We had gotten there really early. The immigration office opened up at 8 o'clock, and I want to say we got to Omaha about 7. And an hour before the agency even opened, there was, I mean, at least 20 people in line already. And it was like this. We stood in line for a long time. I thought it was going to be something we just go in and out. We ended up spending the entire day at the immigration building. So once you waited the hours to come into the building, then you went into the building and waited some more until somebody finally called your name. And that experience really marked me because there was a couple of things that I remembered. I had never seen so many of me in one place. It was the first time that I seen young people like me that weren't my cousins in one place. It was the first time that I heard people speaking English and Spanish. It was the first time that I seen kids interpreting for uncles and parents and stuff like that. And it was so eye-opening for me. And the other part, I was just taken aback that the front desk people were not very nice. And I get it. They probably were stressed out, like there was a ton of people there and there was only about 3 or 4 people on the front desk. But I remember this one lady was just, she would yell at everybody. This isn't filled out right. This isn't signed where it's supposed to be. Go back and next. And it was like buying meat at the meat counter. Like it was just, you know. And so when it was finally our turn, we had a Spanish speaking official who we went up there and we turned in the paperwork, and I explained to him, this is my uncle and we're turning in his paperwork. And the first thing he asked me was, how old are you? And I said, well, I'm 15. And he said, well, you can't be interpreting for your uncle because you have to be at least 18 to interpret. And I argued a little bit and I was like, yes, but you speak Spanish, but you're not speaking to him in Spanish. Can you speak to him in Spanish? And it was kind of this back and forth. And this officer told me, he's like, you know, I like you, you're feisty. And it made me feel good. It made me feel like I was really fighting for a cause. Later, the word is advocating that I learned. But little 15-year-old me didn't know. I just knew that I wanted my uncle to get his paperwork turned in. So we spent the entire day at immigration. Fast forward, like 2 years later, my uncle gets his green card in the mail. And he passed away a few years ago, but he always credited me. He always said, thank you for your help. It was you who helped me get all the stuff that we needed, and I had success. But that event, or that trip, was so eventful for me because it opened my eyes to so many things. It opened my eyes to see that there was more Hispanic people in the world. It opened my eyes up to what is immigration. I came back with that sense of, you know, these people were being yelled at, and I felt bad. Like I genuinely felt bad for them, but it also made me have some internal issues because a part of me was also saying, well, why don't they speak English? Like I would always be after my uncle and be like, Bill, you've been here for 20 years already. Why don't you speak better English? And it gave me these internal feelings of, you know, why haven't they become more Americanized? Why haven't they lost their Mexican roots and become more Americanized? And so for a time in high school, I would allow people to talk this way to me. You know, the reason that you're poor is because your mother only had a 2nd grade education and didn't do more for you guys. And it would make me angry. Yes, you're right. My mother never did more for us. And so I was an angry teenager. We were poor. I mean, I paid for my first car on my own, and my friends had really nice cars, and I had one that turned off at every chance it could. And, you know, somebody telling me, well, why can't your mom just help you get in a better car? Or is your mom working? And it would bring up these internal feelings for me. And so I feel like the root of that was from that appointment at immigration, where I would hear this white officer telling people, that's not filled out right, and I don't understand what you're saying, and just the really negative feeling of being an immigrant. I decided to leave Omaha. Grand Island. I was living in Grand Island. I had graduated from high school. I started working I left the seamstress position and I went to go work at a box store selling cosmetics. And I didn't think I could get the job, but a girl that I worked with at the seamstress shop, she knew somebody, and she said, they're looking for girls with dark hair. What she meant was they were looking for people of color. They were looking for minorities. And so she said, you have a pretty good shot if you go apply for this job. And so I went and applied and I got the job. And it was a big deal because at the time, this is when cosmetics are emerging, you know, as their own brands. It was the Clinique counter. And everybody was white. Everybody who sold anything at the department stores were all white. They're all blonde hair, blue-eyed, or light or fair, you know, skinned, and I was the only person who was like me. And I apparently have a knack for sales. And I didn't know that. And so when I started selling, it was we had a base pay plus commission. And so I would do really well in my sales, and white women would come to the counter and they would compliment me on my skin, the color of my skin, you know, how dark my eyes are. There was always comments about the color of my lips. And so it made me really start to become more conscientious of looking the part. And so my sales grew and I was doing really, really well. And around Christmas time, I was about a year into the cosmetic counter. It was Christmas and it was kind of late on a Saturday. It was around Christmas time. And a group of people came in, and this one guy came by the counter. It was probably a college age kid, and it was a white guy. And he came by and he asked me about something, and I could tell they were drinking because you could smell the alcohol, and there was some girls with them. But the guy was like, "I can't believe you're working here." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "Well, you're just so beautiful. You shouldn't be working at a place like this. You should do something more." And the girls that were with him said, it's the equal opportunity it's the equal opportunity law in effect. That's how that Mexican got the job. And it was such a crush to me. Like, it was such a blow to my self-esteem, because, you know, my sales had been really, really good because I could do well at sales. And I was trying techniques that are more for my eye shape and more for my eye color on women who looked different than me. And it was a different look for them and they liked it. And so I was able to sell things. And so when this girl comes by and says, you know, it's equal opportunity, in effect, I knew kind of what it meant, but I didn't know until I started looking into it. And it just caused this shame, like this, almost like this physical, I don't know, like almost like when you get water, when you first go into the shower and it just comes over you. It was just shame. And it made a difference for me. I felt really depressed after that. I didn't do so well anymore. Every customer that I looked at from then on out, I would question, is this person racist? Is this person not? And so after Christmas, my sales were really low, which people were like, something's going on, her sales are really low. And we had a regional manager who was going to come out and visit us. And she encouraged us to, everybody in the Grand Island location was supposed to travel to Omaha, and we were all going to get together at Omaha. And I went to this meeting. It was probably like 50 women, all selling cosmetics. There was two minorities. It was me and another woman who was Black. And then the regional manager walks in. And she was beautiful. And her name was Claudette, and she was Hispanic. And the moment I seen her, like, and I don't know if somebody had talked to her about things that were happening with me, because she kind of pulled me aside and she was like, you're going to get back up there. I want to see you get back up there. And throughout this meeting that we had, she kept referring back to me and praising me. And it was the first time I seen a Hispanic woman in charge. And I'll never forget her. Even things like, she showed me how to shake somebody's hand. Like, she was like, you need to introduce yourself. You need to keep your face up. You know, when you talk to somebody, look at them in the eye. Do not look down. You know, a firm handshake means everything. And I thank her so much. Like, I wish I could find her. I knew she was from Chicago. That's all I knew. But everything about her, she would send me little notes. She would just encourage me. And so when there was an opening at an Omaha office or an Omaha store, she encouraged me to apply and to move to Omaha, because she said, if you really want to grow, you need to come out of that little town into a bigger city. And so I moved to Omaha, But by that time, Claudette was also leaving her position, and that was the last I seen of her. But moving to Omaha was that second step in my life that I needed to really be able to see that there were other people like me. Omaha has a specific area. We're very segregated in Omaha, where there is South Omaha, where all the Hispanic people are, white Omaha, or West Omaha, where all the white people are, North Omaha, where all the Black people are. But it was the first time that I had seen something like that, where I can go to a store and everybody speaks Spanish. Everybody's listening to the music that I listen to. And I loved it. I loved it. And again, my self-esteem goes up. You know, I'm like, here I am. I'm accepted again. I'm important here. And so when I moved to Omaha, I was still working at the Clinique counter, but a lady came by, and she's white, but she spoke Spanish really, really well. And she was an interpreter for the courthouse. And she asked me if I spoke Spanish, and I said yes, and we conversed a little bit. And she said, you know, they're looking for volunteers for a program that helps families where their kids have been taken away by the state, and you help the parents by visiting, or the kids get to visit their parents, and they need volunteers. And it really moved me because, you know, I had seen a lot of it. And so I contacted this company, and I offered to volunteer. They were actually looking to hire. So instead of taking a volunteer, they offered me a position. And so that's really where my road to social work started, because I could see how unfair the system was, the court system was, for minorities in comparison to people who are white and are of legal status. And I worked with families, and it was incredible, the things that I would see, and I would become so frustrated. Immigration was always an issue. They would take the kids because there had been a DV situation, and the children were pulled from the home. But the social worker, instead of supporting mom and trying to get the children back, they would set goals that were absolutely unattainable for somebody who is uneducated, who is undocumented, who doesn't speak the language, and these goals were not going to happen. And I would argue and argue and argue this, like, how do you expect her to go get a job and get a home that can, you know, have enough space for her 2 kids when she doesn't have papers? Like, what are we doing to focus on that? And it would fall on a deaf ear. I would constantly complain. I would tell my supervisors all the time that these are situations that are not fair. The final point came that there was a case that happened here in Omaha, and there was a young lady who had been kidnapped. And during the kidnapping, the person that was in the car was killed by her estranged boyfriend. And then she was kidnapped. And when I met her, it was because we were doing visits with her children. And I asked her, I said, what involvement have you had with everything that's going on with the court system? And she explained to me that ICE, well, at the time it was INS, the FBI, and the Mexican authorities had all been working with her when she was kidnapped and returned to the United States to prosecute the perpetrator. But there was no help for her to get her kids back. And it was mind-boggling to me. Like, I was so beside myself. We are exactly the same age. And it made me feel I couldn't get over it. I couldn't get over it. I could not understand how after they finished using her and this person is convicted, they're done. And in the meantime, she can't get a job. She can't see her kids. They are threatening to terminate her parental rights. And she is falling deeper and deeper into a depression. And I told my supervisor, I was like, I can't handle this case. I can't, because we are exactly the same age. That could be me. The difference is that my mom came to the United States and I was born here, but that could have been me. And I couldn't handle it. And so they reassigned the case to somebody else. And that's when I just really started to look into more of social work. I got my first job with an attorney who did immigration work. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, and I would really enjoy doing the advocacy piece for families that had been victims of crime. And that was the bigger picture for me, because most of these cases are not happy-go-lucky cases. They're the people that need that extra help. And that's what I like to do, because that could have been me. That could have been my mom. And it makes me think of all the things that I've gone through and where I can really start helping out. And so as my career has gone on, I have worked for the last 20 years in the immigration field. I provide immigration legal services. I'm at a nonprofit right now that focuses on victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking. And I have a Department of Justice fully accredited representative, or that's my accreditation, so that I can represent folks at immigration court, at the USCIS level, all the way up to the Board of Immigration Appeals. And so I really feel like the position that I have has been, the foundation of it is my personal life. Because of everything that I have personally gone through in my lived experience, I'm successful at my job because I know how it feels. There's so many other pieces of my life I can bring up to talk about how I can compare my story to somebody else, but I'd be here forever. But I do say that because I enjoy my work thoroughly because of that connection that I can make with my clients.
Oh, yes, it's wonderful. And as you were telling me your story, it was very clear how it is your personal life that leads you to this current moment.
Yes.
In sociology, there's a definition of sociology as intersection between structural and biography and structure, basically. And you described it perfectly with your narrative. It was textbook, right? How you said, this is my life, this is what it did, this is what I'm doing with it, this is how everything else impacted it. So thank you for that. It's extraordinarily interesting. Bringing you to your current work, do you have direct contact, or how many clients, how many immigrants you work with on a regular basis?
I have a very heavy caseload. So I probably have about 100 cases. The reason it's so big is that sometimes I can work on a case right now and there'll be nothing to do for the next 8 months. Mm-hmm. And so the client I will still continue to represent, but I don't have any it's not active for the next 8 months.
And how many times do you meet with them on average, or during the case, for example?
During a case, I'll meet with the client at least, it depends on the case. Some clients I meet once a week. Some clients I'll meet once a month. Just depends on the case itself. Like if it's somebody who's in immigration court, we have to develop their story. So I don't like to have a lot of time that I don't talk to the client. So I'll probably meet with them once a month. People who have like a VAWA case, the Violence Against Women Act case, I'll probably meet with them a couple of times a week.
And so let's get back to let's move to the current moment. When did you first learn about COVID-19?
I learned about COVID-19. I actually can give you a specific date. It was March. Oh gosh, it was a Thursday. It was like March 13th of 2020. We have legal workshops that we do here at this building. We provide legal services for free. And that day we had a workshop where people can come in and sign up for legal assistance depending on what they need. And so we'll have a group of people here waiting to help them. There had been some news, there's been some information in the news about some families that had gotten sick in Fremont from some virus. I heard it, I didn't pay too much attention to it. But that day in workshop, news started coming in, and it's after hours, it's after 5 o'clock. And my phone keeps buzzing because I have the news alerts on my phone. And a friend who's, I think it's her father, works or sits on the school board, texted me and said, hey, something's going on. I think they're going to close the schools. And we started talking amongst ourselves. And so we finished our workshop, and it was an extra long workshop. We're supposed to end at 7, and we ended up ending at 8. And we were all fearful. Like, the uncertainty of it was just so real.
So it was at that moment that you also felt that this was serious, or was something that grew up after this day?
I understood it to be something more serious. And it was the first time that I heard the word coronavirus, because it was being used in the news. Cristián, can I put you on hold for just a minute? I need to step out for just a second.
Sure, yes. Okay, you were telling me how you realized that this was becoming more serious.
Yes, as the night went on, we were really busy because, like I said, we were in workshop. But my phone, we all knew something was going on because our phones were just constantly buzzing. And we would kind of glance, knew something was going on. And our clients that were coming in were also reading the news stories. And what was happening was there had been some family in a town close to Omaha that had been infected. And they were talking about this virus being a contact spreader, in that all the people that had been around this family were exposed to this virus, and this virus could be deadly. And so as the night went on, you could just feel like the emotion. It just seemed like scary, like something was going on. We didn't know what. We finished out our day, and we all walked out together at the same time. And the reason being because we were actually scared. Like, we kind of figured there would be like armed trucks outside. Like, that's how it was talking, like, amongst people. And somebody was referring to The Walking Dead. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's going to be zombies outside or something. And so we all walked out together, and we were still kind of scared. And, we get home, and my husband was like, I'm glad you're home. Like, there's something going on. And we need to figure out what we're going to do. And by the time I got home, there had been a news report that the Omaha district was closing schools for a week. And our school, my kids go to a different district, but my school, they were going to be closed already the next day. So there was no announcement that had been made. And so we were just trying to figure out, what's going on. But it is the first time that I heard the word coronavirus. And when I heard coronavirus, I didn't know anything about it. So when I heard corona, I was like, why are they giving it this Hispanic name? Like, I immediately thought it had something to do with Hispanics. I immediately thought that. And this family in Fremont, or this family that had been infected in Fremont, that was my worry. I kept trying to find out what race they were, because I thought it was something around Hispanic families.
So the day ends. Your kids have no school the following day. What happened with your organization? Does it close down? Does it stay open? To start working from home? How does it move towards that?
So the next day, because we were going to be late night before, we didn't have to come in. I am not a person to ever take a day off. I don't take a day off. I'm that person who's here whether I'm sick or not. I'm here on Saturday, I'm here on Sunday. I don't ever take a day off. But the news was saying all these different things, and we had the ability to flex our time. So I didn't come to work the next morning. And some of my coworkers said that when I sent that email about not coming in and flexing my time, is when they became a little more concerned, because I'm that person who's always here. And so the next day, it was business as usual, but you could tell, because you could see the emails going back and forth about putting a plan in place. That weekend, so that was Friday then, that weekend, our boss is contacting us on Saturday and saying, we have to go into a new protocol. Something's going on with this virus, and there is a huge liability to us because we see so many clients. We have to limit the amount of people who are in the building. So the first people who were going to be in the building was myself and one of my colleagues from our group of about 8 people. And each department was going to only send 1 or 2 people in for that Monday, and then we were going to do shortened days. But I came into work Monday, and it was the only thing people were talking about, and it was all over the news. And all of a sudden, we're getting these constant reports of there's a person infected here. Anybody who's been in this store in the last 24 hours needs to be following up with their symptoms. It was this fear that immediately sunk in, like it immediately sunk in. And that was Monday. On Tuesday, we were working, and we were told, today's your last day, get what you can. We're going to close down the building. And for somebody who does legal work, I can't just get what I can. Like, I have hundreds of files. Like, I have 100 cases. That might be a mom and 2 kids. So I have 3 files. I can't just get what I can. And so, you know, I spoke to my supervisor, and she was like, we cannot have access to the building. Just try to focus on the next couple of days of hearings, and we'll see if we can work something out for us to come in and get more files. And so that's how it started. And then all of a sudden you started hearing different organizations shutting down, and the different agencies. And I work with an office called ISAP. It's the Intensive Supervision Appearance Program. They're contracted through ICE, and they do supervision of immigrants who are in immigration court. And so I do their Know Your Rights programs, and I go in once a month to go in and do these presentations. And usually at the presentation, it's a small little room, but I usually have a packed house. I usually have a packed room, and it's usually standing room only, like all the seats will be taken and everybody else is standing up. And I was so shocked because everybody else was closing around me. So I called them and I said, we have a presentation this coming Friday. Our building is closing down. What is your plan? And she said, we're going forward. We're going forward. And I was nervous because I started hearing these things in the news about the people that are more susceptible to this virus. And my husband is an open heart surgery survivor, you can say. He had to have open heart surgery a few years ago. And I heard in the news that anybody who is prescribed daily medication should just know that they have a higher risk. And so my husband takes blood thinners daily. He has a barrage of medications that he takes to control the mechanical valve he has in his heart. You know, he has always an issue with being anemic, and so he has to take iron pills along with a blood thinner. And it made me think of him. And then my son has severe asthma. And asthma is already a respiratory illness, and it made me even more scared because they were saying in the news that somebody could come into contact with somebody who has the virus, and I may not know this, and it may not affect me, but I'm going to come home and give it to my children. But I was fearful because this presentation was coming up, and immigration is still open. Immigration court is still open. And I knew that these clients needed information on their cases. So I went ahead and did the presentation. When I came home, I left a change of clothes in the garage, and our garage is not attached. It's outside. So I changed in our garage, and I left my clothes outside, including shoes. I put a bag over my hair because I was scared. I didn't know what I was bringing into the house, and I went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. I was really scared. And my husband kept telling me, he's like, you need to not be so scared because we still have to go to work. We still have bills to pay. We need to just figure out a game plan. And slowly other things started to close around, and eventually immigration did announce their closure. And once they announced their closure, the ISAP building as well closed. And then later on, immigration court closed or stopped, or they canceled all of their court hearings.
But during this time, you still had cases. You still have people to work with. You still had their papers or their status was unclear.
Yes.
What happened? Did you continue meeting with them? Were they able to get their papers if everything was closed? I've read that there is a significant delay in the immigration court and everything. So how did you see all that from your perspective?
So immigration forgot that little detail of people needing their actual documents to continue working, because our local office closed to the public, but they continued working behind the scenes. Other service centers.
You mean where you work, or the local immigration office?
The local immigration office, the local USCIS. They closed to the public, but they continued working behind the scenes. And what I mean by that is that they continued processing cases, but they weren't actually seeing clients, or they weren't actually seeing immigrants. But we still have clients whose work permits are ending. We still have clients who have hard deadlines of documents that need to be submitted. I still have clients. At this time, I was working with a local attorney who had a client who is eligible for benefits, but she was incarcerated, and we had to get her out of jail. So there was still a lot of things going on. And so at my house, my husband had built a clubhouse about a year ago for our kids, and I moved all the kids' stuff out. I moved all of my office stuff in. And I set up like a makeshift office, and I started meeting clients at the local gas station. The gas station had like a little table and eating area, and I didn't ask permission. I just went in and I would say, okay, I'm going to tell you what this form is over the telephone. Then we're going to go in and we'll sign it. If you have any other questions, you'll have to call me and ask the questions. And I did this for several months. And the local Caseys, I think, hated me because they knew me by name. And until one point, the manager told me I couldn't do this anymore. And the nature of our work, client confidentiality is the most important part of what we do. And so I can't give out information about a client. I can't give out names. I can't give out, because, you know, their protection is the most important. And so I didn't know what else to do. There was some of my colleagues meeting with clients in the parking lot, but I just felt that that was very unsafe. And I talked to my husband, and he was like, well, why don't you meet some of your female clients in the driveway? And I was like, okay, I've worked with the majority of these people for at least a year. I have a couple of new clients, but the majority of them, it's been at least a year. So we started doing that. In front of my house, I would meet with somebody outside, go over a form, be able to talk, and do our business. It was very difficult because I don't have a copier. I don't have a scanner. I was using my telephone to take pictures of documents. I was using my telephone quite a bit to make copies. Clients, when they had to bring me original documents, I would try my best to take a photo of it so that I wouldn't keep an original document. But other things like taxes, where I would have to ask people for their taxes, it was hard for me to explain what pages I needed, since there's like so many pages for taxes. And so clients would be like, I can leave this with you and I can come back and pick it up later. And it made me feel really nervous, because these are personal, original documents that they're giving to me in my personal space. And so it made me question, like, am I breaking any laws? Am I breaking any confidentiality issues? And so I would hurry as best as I could to go to our Office Depot by our house to make copies on my own dime and be able to give clients their documents back. In the meantime, in our building, we couldn't come in because we have 4 floors in our building. And so if I were to come in and nobody knows what my exposure has been, the cleaning crew has to come in and clean all the areas that I've been in. And so it presented a problem in itself because of that risk of exposure to anybody else who may come into the building. And so we would have to ask special permission to come into the building. And it usually a day when somebody else was going to be here, so that if the cleaning crew was called in, it's because there were several people in the building. But then we also had to be careful that there were not several people in the building to limit our exposure. And so on those times, I would come in and I would load up a cart with my files, and it would be a day of moving files. So I had something to work on at home because I needed the physical file. I'd also take advantage of those times that I was going to be in the building to make all the copies and the scans that I needed done off of my phone.
And amazing. And from the perspective of your clients, from what you remember, from what you talked to them, what were they feeling? Were they afraid that their papers weren't going to be processed, that they were going to be, you know, that this was going to be an opportunity for ICE to get people? Did any of your clients actually had a negative effect, you know, deportation, jail, anything?
We had some issues internally because since the building was closed down, our mail was being routed to a PO box, and there was somebody from the office that was supposed to pick up the mail and then let us know when there was mail here. And for whatever reason, we've just had these issues with mail. And so, for example, I have 2 cases that have been denied because there was a request for additional evidence that was sent out, but I never received the notice. As a matter of fact, I have one on my desk right now that I just realized, and I never received the request for additional documents. I don't know where that letter is. And so this client, now that his case is denied, is susceptible to be placed into removal proceedings. And so those are the things that I have to be careful of. I have to immediately file a motion to reopen this case and explain the circumstances and pray that they reopen our cases. But many people were extremely concerned when the notice, the announcement for our building closing was published, because it was prepared in English first and submitted, and then later in Spanish. When the English version came out, my phone blew up. People thought that meant that the business was closing. And what were they going to do, and who else was going to continue representing them? Mind you, our services are free of charge, so the majority of people cannot afford to hire an attorney. And so without our services, they don't have anybody else. And so I had several people calling and just extremely fearful that they were not going to have anybody continue their immigration case. This time has been very difficult as well, because clients are waiting for decisions, like final decisions on cases, especially in immigration court. And for example, I have a client who was scheduled for a hearing over the summer, and it was descheduled, and they just finally gave me the notice, and she's not rescheduled until 2023. And her case is a winnable case. It's a case that we're probably going to succeed in, but they've pushed her immigration court case out all the way to 2023 because of the backlog now that's been presented in immigration court.
So what's going to happen with this person in terms of work permit and all that?
So in the midst of all of this pandemic, there's been several changes to the immigration system. And one of the most significant ones is the increase of fees. And so right now, to renew a work permit, it's $410. It's going to bump up to like $535. And so this client, her case is going to continue on now for 3 more years. That's over $1,500 of fees that she has to pay to immigration in order to stay in status before a final decision can be made on her case. And that's, you know, that's not including any other fee that could come up for her. Like eventually she has to have a medical exam done on this particular case, and that's going to be another $1,000. And so that's a lot of money for somebody who doesn't have it.
Yes. And now you're back in the building. Are you seeing new client, or are you seeing clients, or when did you get back to quote unquote normal, or to
So
this new normal?
We're actually still not back to normal. We have actually asked for access back to the building. And so it's our legal department that originally asked for access because of the difficulties in our jobs. And so this has been happening probably for about 2 weeks now, where we can come into the building and work on a file, have access to the printer. And we can have clients here, but there's strict protocol. Client has to we can't have any walk-ins. Client has to come in and get temperature checked, hand sanitized, must wear a mask, and cannot have anybody come with them. And that's our dilemma, because the majority of our clients will have young children. And they will need, and right now with the way schools are 100% online for Omaha and every other day for some schools, most parents have their kids with them. And so it's very difficult for me to tell the single mom, I can see you, but I need you to leave your other 3 kids somewhere. It's difficult, it's impossible. And so I'm still meeting with people in my driveway, but I actually come to the building to work when I need to make copies and I need big things done.
And you mentioned that both one of your children and your husband are high-risk population.
Yes.
How have you handled it at home? Are you still, doing the process of changing outside and then straight to shower, or other things?
So the very first thing that I did when we started to understand what COVID-19 is the first thing I did is I scheduled an appointment with the specialist for my son, because I needed to hear from her what this meant. At that time, they still hadn't decided what they were going to do with school, and I was ready to pull my son from school. I did not want him going. I did not want him to be exposed. And the specialist did tell me that she was encouraged by my son's progress because he has changed medications and he's breathing better. His oxygen saturation level is better. But she said that we just needed to take our extra precautions, like not being out and about, not going out to eat anymore. Family outings were done. Having people over at the house was done. And so that was back in March when we first started hearing this information. And so at that time, when I would meet with a client outside, I would wear a mask and I would wear gloves, and we would have hand sanitizer and Lysol. And so I was Lysoling myself. I didn't know, we just didn't know. Pens and notepads, we were just Lysoling down, and then I'd wait outside for a little bit before I came into the home. I try not to have any contact with my son during the day if I'm going to meet with somebody, unless I can get a shower in before. My husband is considered an essential worker. So my biggest fear was he came home one day in March with this letter from his job that said, in the event the city is closed down, this person is an essential worker, and it gave his name and his place of business and what, if I could think a phone number of his supervisor. And it scared me. It really, really scared me, because I was like, if they're telling us it's this bad, you can't go to work. And my husband already is masked and gloved at work anyway. He works at a cold storage warehouse, and he's one of the supervisors. And so he has a lot of temps that come through. And that's what was my worry, because I said, at least the people who are regulars, you know them and they know your story and they know to stay their distance, like when you guys are at lunch or whatever. And my husband, but the temps don't know that. But my husband was like, no, at work, they're already taking the precautions. And so fast forward to where we're at now in September, we have started venturing out. We only gone to one restaurant. We're only faithful to one restaurant because I'm too scared to go anywhere else. But I like this because they have outdoor dining area. And so we can go outside. We're in the restaurant, but we're dining outside. And so my entire family goes. My children have started attending school again, but it's every other day. And then what's nice about the school, the elementary school, is that of the kids that were there, a big population decided to do 100% remote. And what was left, the kids were split into 2 groups. So for example, my 11-year-old probably has 11 students in his class. And my twin boys have 10 kids in their class in 2nd grade. So the classroom sizes are very small. And they've also limited the hours that they're at school, and they have to wear masks the entire time they're at school. So at first I was really nervous, but I do feel more comfortable right now with the safety precautions at the school that my kids are at because I can see them doing it. My daughter, on the other hand, attends the high school, and they go every other day. And at least once a week, she is having a panic or anxiety attack because there is no social distancing in the hallways. And the kids at lunchtime are supposed to eat like across from each other, but they usually make their way right in front of you, and they're maskless. And every time she hears of somebody being infected, it scares her because, for example, we just got a notice yesterday that a coach tested positive and is on the volleyball team. And she is a cheerleader, and they share the same gym space for practice. And so she started asking me, how far can the virus travel, Mom? And like, will I get it? And so she's very fearful, and I worry about her too. And I worry more for my daughter, for her mental health and the effect that this is taking right now than I do for my husband and my son. Because my husband and my son both have precautions in place that are protecting them. But my daughter, I feel like it's not enough there.
And I assume that your husband has to go to see a doctor on a regular basis.
Yes.
And for your daughter's mental health or any other medical condition, have you been able to do that, or do you have to postpone medical visits due to COVID?
So my husband has to do a once a year big checkup with a cardiologist, and it was canceled. It was supposed to happen in March, and then it was supposed to happen in June, but both times have now been canceled. He was supposed to have it this last week, but there are some, I don't know what's going on with the hospitals in Omaha right now, but it's been rescheduled now to December. So his yearly exam will be over, or will be past due 7 months. And with the heart valve that he had replaced, there's always a big concern for blood clots. And so that's the scary part for me when I hear this, because I'm like, well, we need this yearly appointment because this is where the big stuff gets done. He sees his regular doctor once a month, and he goes in for what they call pro-time checks every 2 weeks. And so he has been able to keep up with those visits with the pro-time checks, but the visits with his doctor at first were all via Zoom. And I just have a hard time knowing that they're doing a Zoom medical visit when it's his heart. You know, how do you do the visit? But now they've gone back to in person, but I can't go with him to the doctor. And I like to be there because I like to listen to it. I like to ask questions. I want to know about diet. I want to know how he's doing, but I can't be there anymore. It has to just be him by himself.
Now let's go back to your organization. Has anyone lost their jobs, or have you lost funding in the current conditions? Or how have you received more funding, or have you applied for more funding to ask for funding for fees for people on court and all those cases?
So I don't know about the grants that come in, but I do know that I've had to request more financial assistance for clients. Sometimes we're able to pay for like half the amount for a work permit, or other filing fees, court costs. And right now we've had to do that a lot more often because we have clients who've lost their job. in this position in our office, nobody has lost their job due to COVID. Because I know that at the beginning of this, they applied for the PPE or what was it called? The protection loan. And they told us about it. And with the intention of nobody will lose their job. We did hear, however, earlier this week that there is a giant deficit because two of the fundraisers that are very big for our organization are in-person fundraisers, and both of them have been canceled. And the deficit is huge because those fundraisers would bring in a lot of money. And so that's something that we have to look at.
Now, your clients are part of the Latino community. They work on meatpacking probably and similar areas where a lot of Latinos work. Have they told you, or how have you seen the impact of this in the community in general?
I'm sad to tell you that I have a client who passed away. He had applied for citizenship, and he had gotten sick with COVID, and less than a week later, he passed away. It was very sad because on top of it, his wife had also they'd both gotten sick, and his wife believes that she brought it home because he worked at a bakery and she worked at the meatpacking plant. And at the meatpacking plant, there was a lot of people that were infected and they were still going to work. And so they were both hospitalized, but her husband didn't make it. And so it's heart-wrenching when you hear that stuff. And then on top of it, the trauma that she's still feeling, that she feels at fault, or that guilt that she feels.
And what about more in general? So what have you heard? What have you seen the impact of COVID on the community?
So many of my clients also are undocumented. Before we can get their status, I mean, they're in an undocumented status. And so I have a lot of clients that are working at restaurants or as housekeepers, or things that they could do by being paid in cash. And when the city closed down, that restaurants were closed down, many people stopped using house cleaning services. Construction was significantly down. A lot of people lost their jobs, their income, and their livelihood. I've had clients who are small business owners, store owners, who have been hit really badly with this pandemic. One, because their business had to close down. And then two, when they were able to reopen up again, a lot of these little shops depend on merchandise that comes in from Mexico. But with the travel ban and the travel restrictions, they can't get merchandise in. So even though people are starting to come out to try to purchase things, there's nothing to purchase in some of these smaller stores. And so it has hit my clientele very difficultly. The common thread right now seems to be people losing housing, or people being threatened with eviction. And so we've been trying to go in and advocate for our clients, saying, you know, we can support maybe part of their rent, or we can give you this up front. You know, please work with this family. And some landlords have worked with us, but some of them just have not. And, you know, I understand it's also their livelihood if all they do is rent homes, but it's happened. It's out there. The other part is food shortage. Because for a while, everybody was going and buying everything off the shelves. And so you would go to a Mexican store and all the tortillas were gone, all the frijoles were gone, all the arroz was gone. The staple items that people need were all gone. And so it was really hard to find those items, or you would go somewhere where the prices were jacked up. And we're talking about somebody who's already on a limited income or no income if they've lost their job, and now all of a sudden are paying $8 for a bag of rice when you can get it, you know, at Walmart for a couple of dollars. And so I've seen all of these things across the board, and just that necessity, it pains me to see clients have to feel like they have to go to work. They don't have the ability to rest and recover. They have to go to work to continue providing for their families. There is no additional assistance for these people. And so it's hard to see. It pains me to see this. And so I try to find resources, but even right now during this pandemic, resources are limited. And so it's been tough across the board.
Yes. Now, we all hope that at some point this is going to end. We'll hope that things are going to, we'll be able to manage the disease and sort of like convert in a normal every yearly flu. How do you think the post-COVID-19 world is going to be for your organization, for your clients, and for you?
I'm worried about my profession. The backlogs that we are seeing are significant right now, and this is going to have a ripple effect into years to come. I have a couple of clients who were waiting for a final appointment in Ciudad Juarez, and these appointments were canceled. And I have one client in particular, it was canceled at the beginning of the year, so back at the end of February, and I didn't even know that there was an issue, but for health reasons, it was canceled, and then the consulate was closed in March. And so we're in September now. This client is going to go almost a year post this interview that we still haven't had, and I don't think we're going to have anytime soon. And what does this look like for this family? Well, it looks like this. Mom is struggling because she's the petitioner. The husband wants to get his legal status in order to legally be able to help his wife provide income for the family, but can't do it. He's done everything the correct way. He's paid the fees. He submitted all the documents that were required. He provided his waiver, which has been approved, and we still don't have a final decision. So the people who, and then on top of it, they were not eligible for the stimulus money because she is married to somebody who is undocumented and used an ITIN on their income taxes. So this little family of, there are 5, really struggles, and they're going to continue to struggle because there's no end date in sight. And what that looks like for me professionally is that's one family, but I have 4 more in that same boat. I mentioned to you the immigration court case. It's pushed out to 2023. That's an impossible date. Like, how do I even know I'm still going to be here in 2023? So I'm signing my name to documents saying I want to continue helping this person, but I don't know where I'm going to be in 2023. I don't know if I'm going to continue or be able to continue representing this client. And some of those things are very hard to accept right now. I'm that person that I will fight for you until the very end, but right now I don't see the end in sight.
So even if this pandemic ends tomorrow, the long-term impact on your community, migrant communities, on your client is going to last for several years.
For several years, yes. For several years.
Thanks for all this wonderful information, and those were my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to share with me about your experience with COVID-19 that I have not asked you about?
I would like to reach out a little outside of Omaha and into the rural areas, because I am from a rural area in Nebraska, and Omaha is considered a city. And so I had a past client, somebody who we've already terminated her case. She's good to go, but she reached out to me just to see how we were doing. And she's a supervisor at a meat packing plant. And she told me, she said, everybody in my household has gotten the virus. And I was shocked. I was like, Luisa, who helped take care of you guys? Like how, and she was like, oh no, we continued going. I know we were sick, but I had to show up at work. I had to show up at work because my manager needed me there. And that, like, I couldn't even put the words together to respond to her, because that's life and death. That's life and death for not just you, but for your colleagues and for the families of your colleagues. And for a while, Grand Island became it was a hot spot because of that same issue. The majority of minorities that are in Grand Island work at the meatpacking plants. And what was happening is they were obligated to go back to work. People didn't understand this virus at the very beginning. And instead of saying you have a sick day, we're told you have to come back into work. And so when you start to see these things happening, what was also happening then in Omaha, what I'm hearing is I hear people say, well, it's the minorities that just don't understand. It's the Mexicans that just don't understand what we're telling them to do. They just don't listen. And I want to take a step back and say, no, that's not correct. That's not correct. And you need to be better educated on the subject, because what is a flexible employer for you is not the same thing when you're talking about somebody who's working in a meatpacking plant, who is worried about their job, who is worried about supporting their family, and who is being told that they have to come into work. That's not flexible. They don't have the ability to take a sick day or weeks or time to recover. And so I feel like what has happened as well is in that area, you hear it. When I go back home to visit my family, or when I'm talking to my mom, I hear it from other people that say, well, I don't go into any of the Hispanic stores anymore because the Mexicans just don't listen. And most of them have the virus anyway. And it's hard to hear those things because you're like, it wasn't intentional. They didn't do this with intention of hurting others. That's the way their circle of life is right now. The other part of this is the mental health effect this is having across the board, especially in the clientele that I serve. Remember that my clientele are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking. And so when I have a client who is trying to leave already a very desperate situation and is stuck at home, it adds a new layer of anxiety and a new layer of stress of, I can't leave now because of this pandemic, and I don't know where to go to. And if I get the virus or my children get sick because I leave, am I going to be faulted for having left? And so it adds all these new layers of stress and trauma to an already difficult situation. And I don't think the mental health aspect of this pandemic is being addressed. Mental health issues are always something that people don't talk about in the United States anyway. And now with this pandemic, it's even more obvious. You know, we need the help, we need the assistance, we need to be reaching out in different ways, even if it's not physically. But it happens, and across the board with minorities, there's just not enough resources in Spanish, in any other language that can address these issues so that people feel more supported, so that people feel better equipped to be able to handle the issue if they get sick.
And do you see any efforts on behalf of the state of providing at least information?
I used to listen in on the governor's daily updates, and I was irritated a couple of times because the translation was not correct, and that's hard to hear. And so I turned it off because I didn't want to hear it anymore, because a translation error, even if it's small, can change the way something is brought out. And so I have not seen a lot of efforts to change resources or to provide resources in other languages. I really haven't. It's something that I'm trying to push for here in our organization, that we need to have that information in other languages to be better able to provide this information. But no, I haven't seen.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for this conversation, for all the information you've given me. And that's it with the interview. I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.